All parents need to see this shocking true story. Incredible story. What if a fleeting moment of innocent curiosity spiraled into a nightmare no family could foresee? That was the shadow hanging over a quiet Thursday afternoon in suburban Atlanta. Rain pattered softly against the windows, drumming a slow rhythm that made the world outside feel distant, almost unreal. Inside, the warmth of a small living room cocooned 8-year-old Illa, curled tightly on the couch, her coloring book open but untouched. Crayons lay abandoned across the carpet, vivid colors muted by the heaviness in her chest. Her mother, Nadia, sat nearby, headset clamped over her ears, voices of colleagues flooding in from a Zoom meeting. She typed furiously, fingers dancing across the keyboard, unaware of the tension building only feet away. Across the room, Illa's father hunched over his laptop, headphones on, immersed in spreadsheets. The house was alive with sound, yet Illa felt invisible. Normally, her older brother, Zane, would pull her into his imaginary adventures or read her favorite stories in silly voices, but that afternoon, something was different. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Hesitating, Illa peeked at Zane. "What are you watching?" she asked quietly. Zane, just a year older, always acting as though he held the world's secrets, waved her closer. "Come look." Its weird curiosity prickled at Illa's stomach. She shuffled across the carpet to join him, eyes drawn to the tablet screen. The video playing was unlike anything she had seen, a strange, unsettling scene involving adults doing things she couldn't understand. She tilted her head. "Why are they doing that?" she whispered. Zane shrugged, eyes wide. "I don't know. Maybe it's for grown-ups." "Just watch a bit." Illa's stomach twisted, a cold knot forming, yet she stayed. She didn't want to seem childish, didn't want to be the baby in front of her brother. As the video continued, colors on the screen darkened, sounds became uncomfortable, and the images twisted into something confusing and unnerving. Still, she did not look away. At her age, curiosity came without caution, and no one had prepared her for the collision of innocence and danger. Zane swiped again. Another video began, darker, stranger. The images made Illa's chest tighten in a way she could not name. "Zane, this feels wrong," she whispered. "It's fine," he said, forcing a confidence he did not feel. "They wouldn't post it if it was really bad. Besides, you're not a baby, right?" Illa bit her lip. His words cut deeper than any warning could. She didn't want to be the child who always said no, so she stayed. But inside, something shifted. In the days that followed, their playful routines faded. The living room forts, the outside games, the laughter, they all vanished. When their parents were busy, Zane quietly pulled out the tablet, and Illa, despite her gut screaming otherwise, sat beside him. The videos grew more disturbing. The images made her feel nervous, unclean, and uneasy. Sleep became a trial. She left the lights on, avoided her parents' gaze, stopped drawing. Silence enveloped the house, thick with unspoken guilt and shame. Zane mirrored her silence, afraid to speak, trapped in the shared weight of what they were exploring. And so the house grew quieter, but tension mounted. Every parent watching this, take note. Sudden withdrawal, nervous habits, changes in routine. They may not be just phases. Curiosity unmonitored can lead to heartbreak. The next few days carried a sinister weight. The house that once rang with laughter and playful chaos now felt hollow. Rain continued to tap against the windows, but the sound was no longer soothing. It was oppressive, almost accusatory. Illa avoided her usual spots on the couch, clinging instead to the corner where the light was dim but the shadows comforting. Her crayons remained untouched, her coloring books gathering dust, a symbol of a childhood slipping quietly away. Zane's presence was no longer the playful anchor she had always leaned on. Instead, he became a reluctant guide into a world they were both too young to comprehend. Each time their parents were distracted, Mom absorbed in her virtual meetings, Dad tending to yard work or fixing the broken fence, Zane would quietly pull out the tablet. Illa felt a magnetic pull toward it, a dangerous curiosity she could not resist, even as dread coiled in her stomach. The videos escalated in strangeness and discomfort. Adults moved in ways she didn't understand, performing actions that made her chest tighten and her hands tremble. She wanted to look away, but Zane's insistence and her own fear of appearing weak kept her glued to the screen. Every night she left the lights on, trying to ward off the shadows that seemed to creep from the corners of her mind. She avoided speaking, avoided drawing, avoided connecting. Silence became her shield. "Zane, I don't think we should," she began one evening, voice shaking. "It's okay," Zane interrupted, trying to sound firm. "It's just a video. We can stop if it gets weird." Illa hesitated, but her desire to please him, to not be the one who said no, won over the instinct screaming in her gut. The two of them retreated to the guest room, the door clicking shut behind them. Shadows pooled in the corners as Zane fumbled with the tablet, replaying a video with a mechanical precision that made her stomach churn. Then it happened. They tried to imitate what they saw, and in an instant everything felt wrong. Pain shot through Illa, not just physical, but emotional, a confusion of shame, fear, and betrayal she couldn't name. "Zane, stop! It hurts!" she cried, voice cracking. Tears blurred her vision. Zane froze, the gravity of their actions crashing down upon him. I didn't know it would. I thought it was just acting." Illa curled into herself, knees drawn tight, shivering. Both of them were paralyzed by the sudden horror of what they had done. They didn't know how to repair the damage, didn't know who could help them undo the nightmare their curiosity had unleashed. Then the door opened. Their grandmother had arrived quietly, entering the front door without a sound. She froze, eyes wide at the scene before her. The tablet, the posture, the trembling, the tears, everything hit her at once. She didn't scream, she didn't yell, she didn't reach for explanations. She simply walked forward, lifted the tablet, scrolled through the history, and sank to her knees. Her cries shattered the silence, a raw, unfiltered sound of heartbreak that echoed through the house. Within moments, their mother rushed in, headset discarded, seeing her mother kneeling, Illa shaking, Zane trembling. What is happening?" she stammered, voice broken. The answer wasn't in words. It was in the shattered quiet of a home that had lost its innocence. In that instant, the family's reality fractured. The digital world they had trusted had become a weapon, a tool of exposure that no one had foreseen. One device, left unmonitored, had created a chasm of fear and confusion. Reports from pediatric organizations highlighted a chilling trend: children as young as 8 encountering adult content. Unsupervised screens, a single click, a moment of curiosity, these were enough to set the stage for trauma. The house felt foreign. Illa clung to her grandmother, Zane isolated in the living room corner, eyes hollow, fingers twitching with guilt. Their parents, consumed with self-blame, could barely process the reality. All their attention to work, all their faith in routines, had not been enough. That night, for the first time since the incident, Illa whispered, trembling, I didn't want to, but I couldn't say no. I thought maybe it was normal." Her grandmother's arms wrapped around her, a fragile lifeline of reassurance. "It's never wrong to say no, and it's never too late to speak up. she murmured. Zane, watching from across the room, finally broke. "I'm sorry. I didn't think it would hurt you. I didn't understand what we were doing." His words hung unfinished in the heavy air. The first step toward recovery had begun, though neither child understood it fully. The path ahead was murky, but for the first time it felt possible. The morning after the incident felt surreal. The rain had stopped, leaving the grass slick and the air heavy with the scent of wet earth. But inside the house, the atmosphere remained thick, tense, and silent. Illa clutched her blanket tightly, eyes wide with anxiety. Zane sat in the corner of the living room, staring at the floor, his mind racing with guilt and confusion. The weight of what had happened pressed on them both, suffocating, inescapable. Their mother, Nadia, moved through the rooms quietly, careful not to startle the children, yet her own hands trembled with residual fear and disbelief. She had spent hours replaying every moment of that gray Thursday afternoon, asking herself over and over, "How did we miss the signs? How did this happen under our roof?" Her father, meanwhile, walked through the backyard, staring at the broken fence, every fallen plank a symbol of their fractured household. For the children, the tablet was now a relic of trauma. Zane avoided it entirely, a mix of shame and fear keeping him away. Ila refused to enter the rooms where it might be found. Yet the memory of the videos lingered, a ghost that haunted their thoughts, twisting curiosity into guilt. They could no longer pretend to be carefree. The innocence of their prior play was gone. Their grandmother stayed, a stabilizing presence in the chaos. She had witnessed the aftermath and understood the delicate balance required: reassurance without enabling, discipline without judgment. Her quiet vigilance offered a small sense of safety, a lifeline in the emotional storm. Later that day, Nadia called a counselor who specialized in childhood trauma. The conversation was long, intense, but necessary. She scheduled sessions for both Illa and Zane and arranged parental guidance meetings for herself and her husband. She realized that this wasn't just about the children. It was about the family learning to navigate a world saturated with dangers they couldn't always control. At school, Illa's teachers were discreetly informed. They approached her with care, offering support without making her feel singled out. Zane received similar attention, though his approach was more reserved, shrouded in shame. The guidance counselor emphasized the importance of rebuilding trust, of creating environments where the children could speak without fear and where mistakes could be discussed openly. Back home, simple steps became monumental acts of courage. Screens were removed from unsupervised spaces. Family time became structured. 1 hour every evening dedicated to conversation, sharing thoughts and feelings, no interruptions, no judgment. Board games, art projects, and cooking together replaced tablet time. These acts, small yet deliberate, helped to slowly reintroduce normalcy. For Illa, therapy was a refuge. She began to articulate feelings she had never known words for: confusion, fear, shame, and anger. With gentle guidance, she discovered that it was acceptable to say no, that her body, her emotions, and her instincts mattered. For Zane, sessions were more tortuous. He grappled with guilt, fear of judgment, and the haunting memory of his sister's pain. But the counselor emphasized a key truth: curiosity alone did not make him a bad person. The important lesson was understanding consequences, learning boundaries, and developing empathy. Days turned into weeks. The family began tentatively to laugh again, though always with caution. Ila's coloring books returned, crayons once again in use. Zane joined in play with hesitation, slowly rediscovering the bond with his sister that had once been natural. Even small gestures, a hug, a shared joke, a quiet conversation became milestones in their recovery. The parents, too, learned to participate fully. They no longer relied solely on routines and rules. They listened, engaged, and reflected. Nadia began nightly sessions with the children, not to monitor, but to guide, to offer tools that screens could never teach: emotional literacy, bodily autonomy, and honest communication. The father, once preoccupied with work, became an active presence, sharing in their play and discussions, reinforcing the safe space that had been absent. By the end of the third week, subtle transformations were visible. Zane's posture relaxed, his guilt softened into understanding. Illa's eyes regained a spark, her laughter no longer hesitant but genuine. The family was still fragile, but hope had returned. They were learning together that recovery was a process, painful, slow, yet possible. The lessons were clear. Vigilance, open dialogue, and emotional guidance were not optional. They were essential. The dangers of unsupervised digital exposure could not be ignored, but with awareness, empathy, and presence, children could reclaim their innocence and safety. The next morning dawned eerily quiet. The sun tried to peek through thick clouds, casting pale light across the living room where remnants of the previous chaos still lingered. Illa sat curled on the couch, a blanket wrapped tightly around her, eyes wide with unease. Zane, now more reserved than ever, sat on the floor with knees drawn up, glancing at the corners as if expecting the trauma to reappear at any moment. Their parents moved carefully, aware that even a raised voice could shatter the fragile calm. Nadia had begun to recognize the weight of silence. It was not peace, it was fear. The family had learned painfully that avoidance and ignorance had consequences far worse than confrontation. Every glance, every sudden movement could trigger memories of that gray Thursday when curiosity had collided with danger. The children's grandmother remained a stabilizing presence. She made small gestures that spoke volumes: a gentle hand on Illa's shoulder, an understanding nod to Zane, quiet reassurance that they were not alone. Her experience, calmness, and steady demeanor began to rebuild a sense of normalcy. Slowly, cautiously, the family began to reintegrate routines that had once been taken for granted. Nadia and her husband had reached out to a childhood trauma counselor. The first session was intense. Illa barely spoke, tears welling as she tried to articulate feelings she hadn't even known existed. Confusion, shame, fear, and guilt tangled together in her heart, leaving her silent. Zane, meanwhile, grappled with a crushing sense of responsibility. He replayed every moment in his mind, agonizing over the pain he had caused. But the counselor offered a lifeline. Curiosity does not equal wrongdoing. Understanding, empathy, and guidance were what mattered most. The family implemented new rules: no devices behind closed doors and no unsupervised tablet time. 1 hour each evening was dedicated to honest conversation. They discussed feelings, experiences, and fears with everyone, parents and children alike, allowed to speak without interruption. Board games, reading sessions, and shared meals became instruments of healing. Illa began to find her voice in therapy. Words she had buried deep, embarrassment, anger, and confusion, emerged, sometimes in small whispers, sometimes in bursts of tears. The counselor encouraged her to name each feeling, teaching her that it was safe to express them. Zane, struggling with guilt, learned that accountability did not mean self-condemnation. He could apologize, learn, and move forward. Over time, the tension in the house slowly lifted. Laughter returned, fragile at first, then gradually stronger. Illa started drawing again, her colors bold and vibrant, a reflection of her slowly returning confidence. Zane began joining her. cautiously at first, then more freely, rediscovering the bond that had been damaged but never broken. The parents' involvement was crucial. They learned to listen without judgment, to respond with compassion, and to be present in ways they had neglected before. Nadia set aside nightly time, not for monitoring homework, but for teaching, conversations about body autonomy, safe boundaries, and trusting one's instincts. Her husband reinforced these lessons through play, shared meals, and quiet check-ins, creating an environment where safety was felt, not enforced. By the end of the month, subtle yet profound changes were evident. Zane's guilt softened into understanding and responsibility. Hila's anxiety eased, her smile returning, hesitant at first, then genuine. Though the house was still healing, hope had returned. Their shared trauma had become a catalyst for growth, not destruction. The lesson became increasingly clear. Vigilance and communication were not optional. They were essential. Children's exposure to adult content was a real and present danger, often arriving unnoticed at ages far younger than many parents imagined. But with proactive guidance, empathy, and presence, children could navigate these threats, preserving both innocence and trust. The family learned that recovery is not a single moment, it is a continuous, careful process. Each conversation, each gesture of empathy, each shared laugh was a brick in rebuilding a home fractured by exposure, curiosity, and unawareness. In this fragile yet hopeful space, Illa and Zane began to rediscover each other and themselves. They were learning that mistakes did not define them, that asking questions was safe, and that true protection was not about control, but about presence. Days turned into weeks, and the fragile equilibrium in the house began to solidify. Mornings were no longer tense or silent. Illa would sit at the kitchen table, pencil in hand, sketching creatures of her imagination, dragons with gentle eyes, forests with paths that led nowhere but joy. Zane watched her quietly at first, guilt still heavy, but slowly curiosity and admiration replaced the shadow of shame. Their parents, aware that trauma leaves traces long after the initial shock, maintained their presence without hovering. Every evening the family gathered for what had become a sacred ritual, 1 hour of uninterrupted conversation. No devices, no distractions, just talk. Sometimes it was laughter, sometimes tears, sometimes silence. But all of it was shared, a deliberate reclaiming of connection. Illa's grandmother remained a constant anchor, her wisdom bridging the gap between fear and trust. She whispered affirmations, guided the children's play, and reminded them that asking for help was not weakness. With her steady support, Illa began to articulate the discomfort and fear she had carried. Words once stifled by shame flowed more freely. I felt dirty. I didn't want to watch that, but I was scared to say no. I don't want to feel that way again. Each confession, raw and honest, carved a path toward healing. Zane, meanwhile, faced a different challenge. The weight of guilt had initially made him defensive, retreating into silence and self-reproach. But therapy sessions gradually revealed a new truth. Understanding the harm he had caused was not the same as being defined by it. He learned to apologize sincerely, to offer reassurance without expectation, and to rebuild trust through action, not words alone. The parents became students in their own right. They researched child development, digital safety, and trauma-informed guidance. They asked difficult questions. Had they acted too late? Could they have predicted the danger? How could they prevent this from happening again? The answers were not simple, but one principle emerged clearly. Presence and proactive conversation outweighed control and punishment. School became another arena for care. The principal, aware of the situation through private meetings with the family, ensured that Illa and Zane were supported without stigma. Teachers watched for signs of distress, but also celebrated small victories, an Illa who raised her hand to answer a question, a Zane who shared a story without fear of judgment. These were subtle, yet significant markers of recovery. The children's nights remained tenderly structured. Bedtime, once filled with apprehension, was now a sanctuary. Reading together, discussing stories, and validating emotions became nightly rituals. Ila's imagination, once stifled by confusion and fear, now flourished. Zane participated actively, inventing fantastical tales where heroes confronted danger with courage and honesty, mirroring the very lessons they were learning in life. The family's relationship with technology also transformed. The tablet was no longer a portal to unmonitored curiosity. Instead, it became a tool used together, with clear boundaries and guided discussions. They explored educational apps, documentaries, and creative software, ensuring that curiosity could exist safely without fear or exposure to harmful content. One evening, as the rain pattered lightly against the windows, a sense of calm settled over the living room. Ila and Zane played a quiet board game, the colors of the pieces vivid against the soft light. Nadia observed, heart swelling, as she realized how far they had come. Their laughter, tentative but genuine, was a sound she had thought lost. The family had learned that trauma does not vanish overnight, but it can be transformed into growth. It demanded patience, empathy, and consistent effort. Healing was not linear. Some days were harder than others, but the act of rebuilding connection, reinforcing trust, and creating open channels of communication became their lifeline. Most importantly, the children were reclaiming agency. Isla had learned that she could refuse, could speak up, and could trust that adults would listen. Zane understood that curiosity must be guided, that mistakes can be corrected, and that empathy was more powerful than fear. By the end of the month, subtle victories had accumulated into visible progress. The family was no longer defined by trauma, but by their resilience, courage, and commitment to one another. And while the memory of the incident remained, it no longer ruled their days. It was a lesson, a caution, and ultimately a catalyst for growth. Months passed, and the home that had once felt fractured by fear slowly reclaimed its warmth. Ila and Zane, though forever marked by their early exposure, began to navigate the world with cautious confidence. Their parents continued to prioritize presence over distraction, engagement over assumption, and trust over silence. Every evening, conversations reinforced boundaries, feelings, and the idea that mistakes were opportunities to learn, not reasons to hide. Ila's laughter returned in small bursts at first, fragile and hesitant, but it grew. She began inventing elaborate drawings and stories, tiny worlds where courage, honesty, and empathy triumphed. Zane participated alongside her, creating parallel tales where mistakes led to lessons rather than shame. Together, they reconstructed play, reclaiming innocence that had been stolen by a moment of digital exposure. Therapy sessions remained ongoing. Ila explored her emotions through art and gentle play, learning the vocabulary to express fear, shame, confusion, and hope. Zane faced his guilt openly, understanding that curiosity without guidance had consequences. The counselor guided both children to process the past while teaching tools to prevent future harm. Importantly, the sessions were family-inclusive, helping parents recognize how to respond without judgment and how to maintain ongoing conversations about safety and boundaries. The family's approach to technology transformed permanently. The tablet, once a symbol of trauma, became a tool for education, creativity, and supervised exploration. Parents implemented clear guidelines: no unsupervised devices, no unmonitored content, and open dialogue about digital interactions. The children learned to ask questions, set limits, and recognize unsafe material. Digital curiosity became safe curiosity. School life improved as well. Ela regained confidence in the classroom, participating in group activities and raising her hand with assurance. Zane became more socially engaged, sharing his experiences with close friends, cautiously but openly when necessary. Teachers noted subtle but meaningful changes: a sparkle of confidence, improved focus, and the ability to articulate feelings when needed. Support networks extended beyond home, reinforcing the family's efforts. Healing was not linear. Some nights, Isla would awaken from nightmares, or Zane would retreat into quiet thought, processing guilt. Parents responded with patience, calm, and empathy, offering reassurance, conversation, and gentle grounding techniques. They reinforced the idea that trauma is part of experience, not identity, and that growth often comes from deliberate reflection and communication. Family rituals, 1 hour of daily conversation, weekly heart check-ins, device-free dinners became permanent fixtures. These moments nurtured connection and rebuilt trust. Conflicts, once exacerbated by unspoken fears, became opportunities for dialogue and understanding. Emotions were validated, and mistakes were reframed as chances for learning rather than sources of punishment. By mid-year, the home resonated with laughter, curiosity, and cautious joy. Ela and Zane played together without fear, inventing games and stories where heroes confronted danger with courage. The parents witnessed transformation: a home once shadowed by panic and secrecy, now illuminated by trust, communication, and compassion. The family's bond, tested by trauma, had become unbreakable through effort and intentional presence. Most crucially, the children reclaimed agency over their experiences. Ela learned to speak up, assert boundaries, and recognize danger. Zane grasped the responsibility of guiding curiosity safely and the power of empathy. Together, they had transformed past exposure into lessons that would shape their decision-making for years to come. As the sun set over their suburban Atlanta home, the family sat together, quietly reflecting. The storm of fear had passed, leaving behind clarity, resilience, and connection. Trauma had tested them, but it had not defeated them. Their story was no longer defined by one dark afternoon, but by the courage to face, discuss, and heal. Parents watching, take note. Children encounter dangers earlier than we expect, often through screens we cannot control. But with guidance, presence, and open conversation, innocence can be preserved, curiosity can be directed safely, and bonds can be strengthened rather than broken. This family's journey proves that even in the aftermath of exposure and confusion, recovery is possible, and love, patience, and dialogue are the tools that make it real. Ela and Zane's laughter echoed through the house, a sound of triumph over fear, a testament to resilience, and a reminder that even the most traumatic beginnings can lead to hope, growth, and a renewed family connection.